Welcome back, everyone, to the Colour Authority and this very last podcast of the season. This is going to be a very deep conversation. So go grab a cup of coffee, tea, whatever you're having, and sit down for this, as I said, very spiritual conversation as well, together with Mark Wentworth. Now, Mark has been studying and working with the healing power of color for 35 years. He's the founder and principal of Colour for Life and creator of the Colour Psychodynamics methodology, both offering life-enhancing methods, integrating color therapy with the collective and visionary world of the depth psychology and expressive arts. He is the author of Add a Little Color to Your Life, which has been translated into 8 languages. Mark lives in the UK, as well as he travels the world sharing and teaching his love for color. Good morning, Mark, and welcome to the Colour Authority. How are you this morning?
Good morning. I'm very well, thank you. And I'm so pleased to be here to talk to you. And it's always good to talk to someone else who loves colour.
Definitely when I do my interviews, those are the highlights. Like talking to colour passionates, colour professional, colour experts, we are speaking the same language. So it's like connecting with your other self almost, right?
Yes. Yep. Yeah, it's like we can kind of wax lyrical about reds, greens, purples, and well, we can get lost in those worlds.
Yes. Well, getting lost in color is a good thing, but not always. Also talking indeed about previous conversations that I had. I normally, however, start the podcast with one question, and that's the same for each and every one, and that is, what is color? So what is your answer to that, Mark? What is color for you?
Well, it would be a bit of a cliche if I said, well, colour is life, considering it's kind of, but to me it is, because, and I say colour is life because it gives you life and it's with you for life. So, you can play with that as much as you want, but it's colour for me, it's a language. I describe colour as a sign language of the soul, because I work in a very specific way with color.
Yeah, and that's something that obviously, diving right into obviously what you're doing, you're going to be the best person to explain what it is that you do. But what really captured me in our very first talk is something that you said to me. You said, why ask yourself what your life mission is and not who I was born to be?
When people nowadays, people are very much searching for a deeper meaning of life. Certainly after the pandemic, people are sort of starting to question. And one of the questions, and seems to be very popular, is people say, what is my purpose? What am I supposed to be doing? Yes, I understand the meaning of what they're talking about, but I think we've lost, in a way, the original meaning, because it's about what is my purpose here in the world. Where it's got lost is now it's like saying, what am I supposed to be doing? Because, when we meet people, we say, oh, hello, what do you do? Which is a terribly, awfully polite way of saying, so how do you make your money?
Yeah.
So, and when people say, what is my purpose? What am I, I was born to do what? We've lost that sense of, because what they're asking is, how am I going to earn my living? How am I going to make my money? Mm-hmm. And, if we see a lot of it on social media, of if you want to change your life, live what you're supposed to do. And it's always on beautiful beaches and kind of working remotely and fantastic salary. But what about, my question there was always, what about if that's not your purpose? And so where it became slightly different, and doing is taking an action. It's quite, if I'm doing something, it's like I'm taking action. Whereas who was I born to be is quite different, because it's much more natural and organic.
From your origin.
Yes, because it comes from the inside. And if you think about it, I don't know whether it's the same across the world, but with children, if you have children, up until about the age of 9 or 10, we use the term, who do you want to be when you grow up? But when it gets to around 10 or 11, it suddenly changes from, what are you going to do? So we lose. And I think it's a really interesting question to ask, who was I born to be? Because then it's bringing out your, let's say, your natural way of being, your natural personality, your natural characteristics. And then based on that means you can do anything you want to do, but you'll always do it from your way of being.
Yeah.
Does that?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. I do think a lot of people would still come to you and say, but how do I do that? But we are going to get into this.
We will, yes.
You are also a true believer that color increases. Let's say it helps us. It truly supports us in our well-being, our health. How do you believe that color affects us, especially after what you have just explained? How can color connect to who you truly are? And how can that increase your intuition, your origin to be?
Yep. So first of all, this is a personal perspective. I think unless you work with color, whether you're an artist, designer, or anything where you're using color, most of the time, everyone is pretty colorblind. Not physiologically, but literally they go around with these kind of blinkers on. And the only time maybe the majority of people think about color is either what am I going to wear or what color am I going to decorate my house with? Or what's the color of what color car would I really love to have?
Yeah, people, well, when I say that I do color, they're like, for fashion. I'm like,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
yes. Same thing. When I first started doing it, and I said, I work with color therapy, people used to say, do you tell me what color clothes to wear? Yeah. So anyway, so I think from that perspective, and also we don't actually have, for most people, a relationship with color. It's totally one-sided. I'm going to do this with color. I'm going to wear this with color. People say, I don't like this color. I don't like that color. I'm not going, I'm painted on my walls, but I wouldn't wear it. Yeah, absolutely fine. But we don't act, if we think of what a relationship is, a relationship is about mutual.
Yeah.
So therefore, I think it's, from my perspective, most people don't have a relationship with color. And so when someone might say, I really I would never wear or use anything orange at all, for example. Sometimes I'll say, well, have you ever considered that orange might feel exactly the same way about you too? It could be a feeling of dislike on both sides. So a lot of what my area that I work with is about building a relationship with color, but treating it as a living being, as a living energy. Because if you think that, if we look at what color actually is, it's that little bit of the electromagnetic frequency. It's that part of that visible spectrum. And if we think that most things are, if we accept that whole quantum theory that everything is basically frequency and vibration, and it's the density and the shape at which makes it and look a certain way, and we accept that therefore it's a living thing. Therefore, to me, color is a living thing. And it's about developing. And so when we develop our relationship with color, and for me, it's very much an internal relationship, we can then use it or build upon that relationship to actually enhance our, let's say, inner resiliences, our strengths, and how we then deal with and relate to everything else in our world, in our outer world. But for me, my work with color starts from the inside first, inside out.
Journey first before actually it becomes something that truly helps you in the daily life.
Yeah.
be where you want to be, or wherever you think your mission in life should be, not be.
Yeah. And so it's, I talk about having color, I talk about them as my color allies. And so very often when I think about color, and I'll tell you how that all came about, sometimes I'm kind of thinking, okay, if I know I'm dealing with a difficult situation, I'll say, okay, who's coming with me today? So to me, they're like, each of the colors are like friends. And they have, to me, they know my story. They know the ins and outs and the depths of my being. They know all the dark secrets of the things that I'd rather not anyone else know, like we all have. And yet they're still present. And equally, they're always saying, come on, you don't think you can do this, but come. Step forward a little bit. I'm going to encourage you. I'm going to keep showing up in your life just to remind you you're going in the right direction.
I love that. Because in the end, yes, it is a relationship. It is an energy also. By using you have a different vibe. I mean, I know that when if we come back to fashion or whatever nail polish I put on or what I'm going to be wearing, I have a different energy to myself because it's reflecting who I am, let's say, how I'm putting myself out there. And that's also how you help people, not necessarily obviously by how to dress, but you help bring people color into their lives through, interestingly, dreams, drama, and story. So can you a little bit explain, because we were diving right into the subject, people do not know what it is. Well, I think they're figuring out absolutely what you're doing, but you have a method, or let's say a process developed. It's called Colour Psychodynamics. What is it? What is it about?
So Colour Psychodynamics is something that I've evolved over around about 35 years. And it's, I've probably, like yourself, I've studied many different things as well. But color has always been the main focus. Over the years, with Colour Psychodynamics, it's been a weaving together of all the things I've learned and experienced, both with color and many other different approaches as well. But my main focus, say, for example, for 20 odd years, I've studied, worked with, and looked at the work and life of Carl Jung. Equally, for the same amount of time, I've got to know and studied and worked with something called psychodrama, which is about bringing yours to life. Now, all of that is woven together, but the main focus is, how does this help me understand color in order to help people get to know and build a different relationship with color? And the psychodrama bit, well, first of all, about the stories. If you think about it, we're all constantly telling stories. There's story reels on social media. There's stories. We talk about stories in film, in advertising. We talk about color stories. We have stories about how different members of the family met, how our parents met. We are what I call storytelling beings. How before the internet, social media, way back when we used to sit around the fires, knowledge and information was passed on through storytelling.
Yeah.
In ancient cultures, there was myths. But nowadays, again, I think we've lost that term, because when you say, oh, this is a myth, people say, yeah, but it's not true. And it's not about whether it is true, whether it actually happened or not. It's the message within the story. And so from that perspective, and every color has a story to tell, a different one for you and a different one for me. People know for a fact that, let's say, if you're driving along in your car and you've got the radio on, a certain song comes on, immediately you're transported back to a past time, And I would say the majority of people will say it's usually got a love connection. Very few people will say, oh, I remember it was my first day at school, kind of. And then, of course, there's smell. You know, we walk into a store somewhere, or we walk and we say, oh, this maybe reminds me of, let's say, going to my grandmother's house, because this is the color. To me, does exactly the same thing, but it's much more subtle about it. Yeah. We don't think it's only when we pay attention and say, oh, yes, this color reminds me of this color. And so from that basis, dreams are stories. And very often when I'm working with dreams, I'm always asking people to pay attention to the color of their dreams.
Now thinking obviously of the colors of my dreams, but I don't remember, unless they were horrible dreams, unfortunately.
Yep. But, you know, again, so you've got that aspect. So again, they're kind of aspects to me. Sometimes we're so busy in life that the soul can't say, hey, pay attention. So sometimes it comes through. The only way it gets our attention is in a dream. So if we take dreams, drama, and the thing about drama is, I remember before I knew the terminology psychodrama and I knew what psychodrama was, I remember having pieces of plasticine, you know, kind of pieces of modeling, pieces of plasticine of two different colors. And I remember laying on the floor with them and actually saying, so this is red, and I'd molded it into a shape, into a look a certain way. And I had green, and they were having like conversations like we do as children, except I was an adult, but having these conversations with colors. But in the process, when I looked what these two colors had to say, it gave me deep insight into a situation that I was dealing with at the time.
That's interesting. And I think that's how color can be healing. What's your perspective on that? Is color healing?
Absolutely. You know, and healing, healing to me is, when we think of healing, very often, most of the time we think of when there's something when we're unwell.
Yeah, or broken. Yeah.
Or broken. Whereas healing can also be where we've forgotten who we are. So that it can be, you know, like I was saying, to me, sometimes it's an ally. It's that reminder of saying, hey, come here, come down this path. So yeah, it can be healing. There's so many, you know, kind of, and the color healing aspect, it goes back thousands of years. There's so many of things of kind of in ancient Greece, in Egypt, and in other parts of the world where color was part of a major healing modalities.
And it's maybe time that we go back to that, right? I mean, it's time that we go back to maybe our origin, instead of indeed the external pressure of who we are, how we're supposed to be. And I think, well, we are in the era of Aquarius, so things obviously are changing there too. Yesterday, I found out I'm, as a human design, I am a manifestor. So that's also something that obviously is very interesting to get to know a little bit of how you were put on this earth and what that means for you. And we look into color. A few weeks ago, you did a reading. So you'll explain a little bit about what you've read, but also how did you read me? So you asked me for my full name, which is always embarrassing in my case, because I have many names, which most people are not aware of, the date of birth, and also a color that I've been working with, thanks to the color therapy that I did with Thelma van der Werf, which is yellow. You looked into what this entailed for me and for my person, who I was born to be. Can you a little bit explain to also the audience what you exactly did, looking at my name, my date of birth, and what the result was?
So if we need to go back, I need to tell you a story. If we go way back in time to, let's say, kind of to ancient Greece, when you were born, they would watch your kind of behavior, again, we come back to that natural way of being, you know. And so when we're children, we are not yet socialized, so we act very spontaneously. And so we very often see our natural talents. kind of, I think it was Plato who said you can learn more about a person by watching them play for an hour than you can by talking to them for a year. Because when we play, we start to bring out. So when people say, what is my purpose? Kind of, what is my purpose for being? And they go, oh, I'm a little bit lost. I always suggest go back to childhood. What did you naturally do in childhood? What games did you play? What role did you play within groups? Or maybe you were a loner. All of those are clues because there are natural behaviors. So ancient Greece, they would watch your natural behaviors, and then you would be deemed either, let's say for a female, you would be a daughter of one of the goddesses. And if you were male, you'd be a son of one of the gods. And based on that, you would then kind of be guided in a certain way to develop those natural talents. Then, because to me, I don't know whether you agree with this, but as we are at the moment, as in the industrialized world, we've lost our myth. Yeah. We don't have myths. In ancient cultures, they had the gods, the goddesses to guide them. We don't seem to have a guiding myth. We're a little bit at sea. We're a little bit lost, if you like. Anyway, so then, of course, you have things like astrology. Yep. Again, if you look at astrology, they take your date of birth, your time of birth, and your place of birth, and then they create an astrological map. It's like taking a snapshot of the heavens. And based on that, yes, they can say, okay, you are kind of, what sign are you? Kind of, well, let's say Leo, and you can say, okay, but of course, you're not like all other Leos. There's something unique about you. And that's what the astrology map does. That's what makes it personal. So I will say there's many roads that all lead to Rome. It's just that we have to find that one that works for us. So all of that. Then there's the basics of what I call the color psychodynamics. It's where we take your date of birth and date of birth. And here we use the medium of numbers. So we use, again, Pythagoras. And his, whilst he was known for his mathematical formula, sometimes people don't realize that actually one of his main purposes of his work and studies was to actually discover what happens to the soul after death. So whilst we can put him here for what we know as the mathematical formula, if we study his full life, then we see something else as well. So he believed that numbers could explain the whole universe and the mysteries of the universe. And so like 1 sounds very different to 2, 2 sounds very different to 3. And if you measure those on a sound machine, you will see these different frequencies, which color obviously is a frequency. So if we then take date of birth, which is a series of numbers, and we use the Pythagorean formula to end up with a number between 1 and 9, each of those numbers then becomes a color. It is that. So like your number was 3, your color is yellow. Of course, people will say, well, where there's no, I've searched and searched for years and years. There's no one specific person origin which suddenly turned numbers to colors. Or like there's many different inputs, because sound and color you can't almost like separate because it's frequency. So we can see that. And number 1, like I said, number 1 sounds very different to number 2. So the frequency of 1 will be different to the frequency of 4. And if we just basically turn that into color, so it's a visible language, we can then see, then if we look to see that when we say 3 is yellow, then we have the origins of things like in the Upanishads of the chakras. Most people nowadays know about chakras, so we can say, okay, so yellow relates to solar plexus. So we have a place to begin with. So that's what I call, that's your foundation. And then when I was asking you about date of birth, basically it's the same thing, where that's what makes it personal. We translate that again all into color. Each letter relates to a number, which in turn relates to a color. And you then have what I call, it's almost like your color DNA. In essence, that's like the seed, if you like, that you were born with. And sometimes people will say, yeah, but I didn't choose my name. It was for my parents. But from many different other belief systems, there's this soul contract that says, yep, this is going to be my fate. And my fate is something we can't change. So you can't change your date of birth, even though some people would love to. You can't change your date of birth, where you were born, the era you were born into, or the place you were born. So that's kind of, let's say, that's setting the boundaries of, let's say, it's almost like setting the container. And part of that is your name. Okay. It says, this is the unique frequency that you are going to show up in the universe as unique as a fingerprint. This is your unique name. And then, then of course people will say, let's say you have something like John Smith. You could have two John Smiths born on the same day, same name, but it's then the fate that they were born into that makes them experience those colors differently. They have different family experience, different life experience, different places they were born. All of that starts to shape those colors. So they're not hard and fast. So it's a symbolism. So I would say I work much more with the symbolic language of color.
So as a yellow, let's call it, I'm a yellow person. What does that entail? What are I'm not going to say the word mission anymore, because obviously I've understood that that's not what it is. But who was I born to be?
Okay, so, let me think of it like this. A rose doesn't try to do a rose. A rose just is a rose. So when I say to people, this is your colored DNA, is I say, okay, it's permission to be self. Why try to be something else? Why? Let's say, so your color is yellow. And my question would be, why try to be blue if you're born to be yellow? Mm-hmm. Because if you try to be blue, you will always believe there's something wrong with you, because you will never feel quite enough. So it's about saying, okay, this is your DNA, be this.
It's more about acknowledging. So the fact that I'm a warrior, I'm very, again, back to the solar plexus, following my gut, intuition, and those things, and that important to me. That is something that maybe I've always known, or at least I'm getting in touch with through life experiences, of course. But that is, so what you are technically, you're getting people back on the path that they're supposed to be on.
Yes. Yep. So as you said, you kind of, so where the Jungian aspect comes in is, whilst I talk about the symbolic language of color, archetypes are fantastic because they're symbol. They're universal patterns of behavior. They shape and they tell us, they explain, like I was saying earlier, in ancient cultures, they had gods and goddesses, which are different forms of archetypes. Mm-hmm. And so by combining and adding in, treating color as an archetype and actually having archetypes connected with that, it enables me to help to explain to people human behavior. So I can say to you, okay, so your color is yellow, your ruling archetype is the warrior. So that's how to approach life. The warrior has this determination. It's very focused. It always has a goal. And I think I said to you, one of the things about yellow and a warrior is they're always on a quest. They're always asking that question is why. I think, kind of like at the end of life, it will still be the question, why? Why now? Why this day? Why that? Why in that way? So it's that's a quest. Now, so that's a natural way of being. Now, imagine you grow up in an environment where that curiosity is made to be something negative, it turns inwards. And then the warrior basically gets bored and kind of then turns into the most amazing super critic you've ever met. Because it's got nothing else to do. So it says, well, I'll make you my project instead. I'll make you my quest. So, kind of, it will constantly drive you kind of like, it was like, oh, this is not good enough. Oh, maybe you could improve on this. So each archetype has, in psychodrama terminology, we say there's many different parts of us that have what is known as they have an act hunger, and a hunger to perform and hunger to act out. And if they don't get that opportunity, they then become more, let's say, negative is the wrong word, but they turn and their energy becomes different. They either become, let's say, the archetype becomes either turns into a critic, or it loses its power and it becomes a servant to someone else's warrior. Yeah. So we give up on our hopes and dreams for the sake of someone else or something else.
Exactly. Yes, I mean, impossible in those moments. But it is interesting because then you sent me my color DNA, which is yellow, but then inside there are multiple colors, and you gave me an affirmation to work with, which I was born to connect through happiness, hope, and joy, and then to meditate with this color. Is that the only way to get back to that origin, or is there also by surrounding yourself with yellow, eating yellow foods, I don't know, dressing more in yellow, or is it literally more an inner journey?
It's all of the above. So I've made suggestions. So like the affirmation, that was based on looking not only at your yellow, but your color DNA as a whole to make it personal to you. And it's such, let's say, I was born to, happiness, joy, and equally wisdom. And so it's kind of given you, rather than be a very narrow focus, it's saying, okay, whatever I do, how do I bring this into whatever I choose to do? So then it's saying, you can do whatever you want to do, but I have these core values and I can measure everything. So if you're invited to do something, does this live up to my does this fulfill these core inner values? Kind of, one thing about being yellow is the question is, how do I shine my light into the world? And, sometimes people find that light too bright. Yeah. So they're going to make you question it. And sometimes we can dim down the light. So it's always about learning how to manage that. So yes, you could wear it if yellow suits you, kind of if you feel comfortable in yellow. But also it's about how can you be it? This is you embodying your color profile. So it's like, well, I've told you all these qualities. What does that look like? So maybe you can say, well, actually, when I think of these qualities, I think of this particular style of dress or this particular type of fashion. So you're still embodying the energy, but not necessarily wearing the color.
Yeah. So it's about letting your light shine through whatever it is, whether it's a smile, an accessory, the way you move, the way you talk.
Yep. And if you then use that when you go, let's say if you write, you can then say, how do I incorporate this aspect of happiness, joy, and wisdom into whatever I write? How do I share that? And then basically it's no, because sometimes, nowadays with social media, you can meet people, or you see, maybe you follow a person on social media and then you meet them in person and it's like, oh, and there's a bit of because they're sort of they don't quite match. Whereas if your whole presentation, because then it gives you a container to work with. It's also, just to say, it also works the same, because everything is energy, frequency, and vibration. It also works the same with businesses as well. So you can choose the day you start, then look at the name, then you have a whole profile, a whole DNA. Then you know how to write your copy. You know how to use what to incorporate into design, how to, it's a starting point, like DNA. It's a building block.
This is so interesting. Yes, I think this is a world opening up that I think for a lot of people, that's also why obviously we're doing this interview. That is, I think it's important for people to know more about, and that forcing who you're not is how you're obviously getting that door slammed right up in your face constantly over and over again. And I think also, so talking about DNA, a year also has a DNA, you explained to me.
Yes.
So it was very interestingly, it's not just about the people, but also years are symbolized. So 2020, the year of the pandemic, it disrupted lives globally. We initially thought it was only going to be China and Italy, and boom, it was everywhere. You said green. What can you tell about us?
So again, what I'm doing is taking the number of the year. So 2022 plus 2 is 4, which comes out as green. Now, if you take it from the energy system, the chakras, it relates to the heart chakra, which also governs the lungs. So you might kind of think, okay, there's a little bit of, and of course, connection. And of course, what we're doing is I'm viewing it from more of a collective viewpoint to help almost like understand, make sense of, and to put it into a collective perspective. Not so much in the, let's say, the suffering, in the kind of like the everyday. So we're looking at it much more from a slightly more detached perspective. Because in depth psychology, you can view everything as archetypal. And archetypes, just to clarify, archetypes, the best way I describe them is like these huge oil tankers. And it takes a long time to move them in a certain direction. They're like the deep currents under the ocean. There's the surface ones, but there's these deep currents. And if you look at everything from an archetypal perspective, you get to see how society, how the world works from this very global perspective. It's like, when you're on an aeroplane and you're looking down below and you can see all these kind of clouds and beautiful things. And it always looks so calm and peaceful. And yet, outside of that the safety of that aeroplane, it's absolutely turbulent. There's winds and there's blah, blah, blah. That's if you think of archetypes like that. So if we look at that from that perspective, so green governs the lungs. If we also look at, we talk about the forests of the world as the lungs of the earth, what we're actually doing to the forestry and taking away, we might understand that, yes, we're becoming more, let's say, prone to something that affects our breathing, affects the lungs, and equally affects the heart. Also, green is about structure. It actually, in its darker shades, it stops everything. It becomes stagnant. Think of stagnant pond water. Nothing is flowing.
Incredible.
So from that perspective, you could say, okay, I can see, and it also green, as we know, connects us to Mother Nature. So from that perspective, it's like saying, nope, we're just going to stop. Interesting that, so that was 2020, 2021, we went into blue, which is we moved through. So that was kind of the blue. And again, we were still in it, but people were starting to communicate. Obviously, it's about communication, but it's also about trust and honesty. And if we look at the things that were coming to the light around the world about truths were being revealed, it's also about it's also one of the most, it's known as one of the most healing colors. And then, interestingly, during that time, this was happening. We were all having to wear masks. So and one of the aspects of blue is not only about speaking, but it's also about listening. And maybe if we looked at it symbolically, we might say the wearing of the mask could be symbolically saying, is stop talking and listen. Think about it, we talk about true listening, but most people, when they listen in order to reply.
That's how I always forget the name of the person I'm introducing.
And then we come to, like we were talking when we were having that conversation the other week, we were saying, everyone was saying, yay, this year, this is it. We're going to be.
Just being like, I was like, what? No.
Yep. And then I think for most people, they will say, what the hell had just happened? When is this year going to be over? Let alone for the past 2 years. Indigo.
In transition, is that the indigo, the blue? Is that the transition? Is it the
indigo? Is firstly, no one ever knows what color it is. If people say, is it blue? Is it purple? And during the time of the pandemic, when I was speaking to people around the world, I was saying to them, if you had a color for the pandemic, what color would it be? And it was literally like all of a sudden, everyone knew what indigo was, because everyone said, if I had to give it a color, it would be indigo. And it's suddenly this, and I said, well, is there a color which you would give to the coming out of it? Not one definitive color. Indigo was and I wrote something about called Indigo, the color of a pandemic. Because if you think about everything that happened, it paused and it stopped us it just says, stop. More people were looking at, I'm doing this job. Is this really what I want to do? Kind of people were, if they were lucky to, because obviously, that's not the case for everyone. People sometimes, we need to do it because we need to survive. So I would say that's not for the same for everyone. Indigo is the color of deep transformation. One of the archetypes related to indigo is death. And death is a deep transformation. It's the color of deep transformation. I mean, hey, you only have to look at what's happened in the past few weeks in the UK to understand where that has come to play. Of course, death happens all the time, but I think it's been closer to people than maybe it has before in different ways. And remember, death is not only about let's say the death of a person. It could be the ending of a career, ending of a relationship, so it really is. I describe indigo as the gloop year. You know how whether it's a caterpillar, it goes into a kind of pupus and it goes into the chrysalis. And then during that process, part of that is it breaks down into this gloop. It becomes literally nothing. There's no shape to it. It's just this gloop. And then gradually it starts to take a shape and a form and forms into either a butterfly, a moth, anything like that. And then it emerges. So, that's, to me, that's what an indigo year. This is really that sense of, okay, let's get ready. I know you're going to ask me, what about 2023?
Now, like, okay, tell us that 2023 is going to be the color that we can all work with. So what is...
So interestingly, the color, if we follow the kind of the rainbow, obviously 2023 is violet, and which is really interesting because if you look at, I've been looking at the trend forecasts, and in both in fashion, furniture, the whole across the board in design, and there's a real thing of in paints in, you see there's violet, there's lilacs, there's lavenders, there's kind of these they're starting to emerge, which is so interesting when you see that happening. It's like, oh, we're in sync. And so it is that if there was if I had a key word for this year, this indigo year, it would be surrender. Because there's that, you probably heard that phrase people often use, which says, when we make plans, God laughs. Well, I think this year he's been rolling around the floor hysterically. Because when people say, oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and I say, well, let's just have that conversation afterwards, shall we? And I say, just be prepared that things could change. So it's probably been a very challenging year for people who like to know what they're doing, like to be in control of things, because suddenly it's like, just be a little bit prepared. So going into, if there was a word to describe this coming year, 2023, it would be emergence.
Emergence.
Yeah. So in that emergence, and already, you can see around about end of August, September, I start to feel what I describe as like the slight breeze of the new color coming. It's a bit like kind of, I can feel the air changing.
September, right? I feel opportunities, like it's starting to happen, or things are opening.
Yeah, I start to, every year, around this time, I start to feel the slight hint of the breeze of the new color. So I'm always starting to know, because it's when we start to see the interest. So like, if we look at what's happened here in the UK, obviously not well here in the UK, but across the world, the Queen, because as someone was saying the other day, when we say the Queen, we know we're not just talking about the Queen of England or the United Kingdom, but people know who the Queen is. You just say, oh, the Queen, and people knew exactly who you were talking about. So interestingly, we have this deep transformation through this death and transformation. And now we have the new emerging. And what's interesting about from the point of view of the colors, the Queen was actually violet. Her life path color was violet. And the archetype ruling violet is the Queen. So if ever there was a person who lived up to who she was born to be, she is a very, very good example.
Well, that's what they believe in the monarchy in the UK, right? You are born into being a king.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Still, royalty generally is still very much connected to the color of purple.
Yes. But what's interesting is Princess Diana. She too was violet. And interestingly, Helen Mirren, who played the Queen, is also violet. When you start kind of looking at all the various different people, then you watch, and it's because obviously with people who are in the public eye, if you watch their behaviors and their color, you go, yes, now I can see it now. And that's why I use people in the public to give examples and say, look, one of the things about the Queen archetype is dedication to service. And I didn't know, but I was watching obviously you see a lot of films and interviews of when she made the thing kind of when she was 25. I dedicate my life of service. What color am I? So what color am I? Gold.
Of course.
So let me just clarify that. Firstly, let me dispel this myth, because sometimes people think there's a hierarchy of color. I can't tell you how many times I've been given talks, workshops, and I see after we've done the calculations, people are kind of counting up and and I'm saying, do you need any help doing the calculations? And I remember one lady saying, no, I'm just counting how many lifetimes, she believed in reincarnation, how many lifetimes I've got to go until I'm violet, rose, or gold. Because people have this idea that there's the higher up the spectrum from the point of frequency and vibration, the more evolved you are.
Which is not true.
Which is not true at all. It's just a different experience. I often joke with my students, there's no hierarchy of color apart from gold. No, seriously. Seriously. Think of it like this. If you had in the center of a room, you had universal truth, and you had imagine looking at it from a clock perspective, you got people at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, etc., etc. But in the center was universal truth. Everyone's looking at the same thing, but just from different perspective. And that's my expert. There's no hierarchy of color. It's just how we perceive the same thing. Yeah, so like when you're working with, when I'm working with, whether it's teams, families, classrooms, whatever, it's helping understand that actually we're just viewing things from it and reacting or responding from different perspectives based on the essence of who we are. So gold has this need to pass on knowledge and information. And sometimes it's exhausting because it's that sense of whatever happens, it's always that sense of how can I pass this on to people? How can I share this with people?
So this is part of who you are.
Yep.
Podcast with me, and you're sharing that knowledge and passing on knowledge to in the end support people.
Yeah, and it's that sense of studying all these different things and bringing it all together is like, how can I help people to understand color from a different perspective rather than just, this is what you put on the walls, this is what you wear. Let's go into it. Let's deepen that relationships to build a relationship with color. I
think the biggest takeaway for me for this conversation, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of takeaways from people that are listening, is that indeed it's not just about incorporating that color into your life just by applying it on your walls or in your clothes, but it is that in my case, obviously the shining, it is the bringing it out. And I think that is that still, it's the intuition. It is just really feeling who you are and following those steps and that direction.
Yep, it really is. It's that permission to be. I think over the years, I think the biggest thing and the most common thing that people have said is like, well, what you're telling me, I've known this, but maybe I've forgotten about it or I learned that it wasn't okay. But it's that permission to be myself. And to me, that's the greatest gift. That's worth, the hours of kind of everything. For me, that's the greatest gift when you're sitting with someone and you see the light come on.
And that is a gift that you gave back to me, I can say.
Oh, no, thank you. Yeah. And it's kind of like, that's that sense of, that's why, I always say it is a way of living and being. What I'm helping you, what I'm guiding people to say is this is a way of living and being. Yes, like you were saying, I can wear the color, but how do I live it? How do I be it? It's that sense of, always think back. A rose never does a rose. It just is a rose. Equally, I use rose, but you could use any other plant or tree. And equally, if you're amongst many other roses, you don't start comparing and say, oh, my flowers, my buds are much brighter than yours. They kind of different. Like, nope, totally unique. So you are unique amongst yellows. No one else can be like you. You can have similarities, but it's your unique way of expressing it that makes it important. And also, if you think about it, the idea of it is like, well, why? It's because I believe that we've been born at this particular time in this particular way, because on a deep soul level, who we are helps humankind evolve. Whatever we do, we're never born without reason for being. No one. There's never ever a spare part.
This is just how I think this ends this conversation, because that is exactly how I feel when I talk to you, and I think that is the best message to get out there today. Thank you so much.
You're very, very welcome, and thank you.